Okay, so let's start then. So a very warm welcome to everyone to this seventh episode of our webinar series. So we have been running for the past 3 years now, series on enabling circular economy at scale. And the whole idea is to look at multiple dimensions of circular economy across various sectors. Many a times you may find that we are repeating ourselves in these webinars, but the spaces are overlapping in many cases. The whole focus has been to look at, as I said, multiple dimensions of circular economy and are there ways and means to solve the problem in a meaningful way. And while there has been a lot of effort, both at the government and at the end of brands and producers, civil society organizations, the large scale impacts are yet to be seen. So a lot of talks, a lot of dialogues, a lot of movement, but impact still not very visible. And I'm talking from a resource efficiency point of view, reuse of materials point of view, and most importantly, the pollution point of view. We still see large neglects. We still see hugely mismanagement of waste, across sectors. So the context for the discussions like today's are to really identify and debate these topics. And sometimes, something new emerges. And we have found that in many of our webinars, a new perspective emerges. Even we are people who are debating are people who regularly debate these topics. But that's the beauty of doing open sessions. So that's what we aim to enable today. Look at social and cultural dimensions, specifically for waste management. And this, what it would mean is looking at habits and perceptions, view on the sector. In general, waste has been viewed negatively by people. We don't want our children, our relatives to work in the waste sector because it's just supposed to be ganda, it is supposed to be full of challenges, it's supposed to be driven by corrupt practices, it is supposed to be ridden by misgovernance. So, the perceptions around the sector itself of the waste workers or the people who work in the sector. Then we would also like to bring in some views around the accountabilities. So how do we create some accountability in the sector so that we not only see activities, but we also see deep impacts. Today, like I said, deep impact is what is being missed, and not just by us, I would say across the sector by people who are either party to it or are observers to the sector. Now, we have a very good group of people who will be debating today. I will be playing role more or less like an observer, may interject here and there. So we have four incredible speakers today, or panelists. We have Dr. Shireen Mirza, we have Dr. Anwesha Borthakur, we have Dr. Kalyan, a very good old friend, and then we have Surendra, again, Surendra Gotherwal, who has now been leading this at 𝗗𝗂𝗶𝗀𝗂𝗵𝗲. So a very powerful force in trying to bring in the change. So we will start with the opening talk by Mr. Gotherwal and then open the panel. This series is essentially sponsored by a group of companies, group of producers, namely Apple, Dell, Canon, Cisco, Ericsson, Tejas, Boat, Nothing, and Sienna. The reason why these entities sponsor these programs is essentially to bring in debate. And what most of the organizations realize is that whatever we may do or say, the large shift is still not visible. And only through dialogue and debates, we may be able to find some new answers to these very tricky old problems. These are not problems which have just emerged, they have been present, but we haven't been able to solve them yet in a meaningful way. So with this, I would like to invite Mr. Gotherwal to share his keynote. And Surendra, I also request you to stay on if you can for the panel. if possible, if time permits, so that in case there are certain questions, if there is larger viewpoints that you want to bring in the debate, you are also able to. But again, if time permits. Thank you, all of you, for being a part of this discussion and enabling this dialogue. Over to you, Surendra.
Thank you, Pranshu. So first, good afternoon to all. So I'm Surendra Kumar Gotherwal. I'm working in this Ministry of Electronics and IT for last 12 years, and I'm the nodal officer for this e-waste management circularity in the electronic sector in the ministry. So I'm handling this area for last 12 years. My boss, Dr. Sandeep Chatterjee, I think you will be knowing, he was leading this activity. This is last year he superannuated, so I'm adding this activity in the ministry. So first, I would like to thank 𝗗𝗏𝗀𝗶𝗀𝗵𝗲𝗱 team for organizing this webinar series on especially on e-waste and circular economy, because this is the priority area of Government of India. And you may see this lot of initiative has been taken by Government of India, lot of direction has been given by at the top level. So we are thankful to 𝗗𝗏𝗀𝗶𝗀𝗵𝗲𝗀 team for organizing this type of event. And we have seen this 𝗗𝗏𝗀𝗶𝗀𝗵𝗲𝗀 release 30 episodes of this webinar in last 3 and 4 years. And there you could bring 60 plus speakers, international and global, national, international speakers on this webinar. So we are congratulations to 𝗗𝗏𝗀𝗶𝗀𝗵𝗲𝗀 team also. And we also would like to mention 𝗗𝗏𝗀𝗶𝗀𝗵𝗲𝗀 team contribution in electronic waste management by ensuring critical minerals requirement of the country for different sector, including strategic and defense. So you can see the circular economy is the new mantra for our development and future growth. And our Honorable Prime Minister also given this quote or this mantra to us to achieve the circular economy in different sectors, not in electronics. He has given different 11 sectors: solid waste management, medical electronics, any area. He asked or he given direction to all relevant ministries to achieve circularity. So he has given 4 R's: reuse, repair, recover, and remanufacture. And he also given direction to ensure regeneration of products and materials. So these we can understand is that top level direction given to different ministries. So, and you can see this e-waste is a very important area, and this is our we can say it is a global challenge. Not in India, it is a global challenge for other countries also, and it is growing rapidly. And as per this UN Global E-Waste Monitor report, you can see India is the third largest generator of e-waste globally, with 4.17 billion metric ton of e-waste generated in 2022. On the other hand, you can see this different initiative has been taken by the Government of India. We are promoting electronic manufacturing in our country. So this is also growing our demand, even critical raw material demand, secondary raw material demand in our country. So we can see this due to this growing demand of electronic sector, India is the third largest consumer of secondary raw material. So there is a huge opportunity with this secondary raw material, whatever we have in this EEE sector. And you can see recently Ministry of Mines, Government of India released a report on critical minerals requirement of country. So we can see this 30 minerals are critical for our country, for required for different sectors, strategic and defense sectors. And out of 50% critical minerals, we are fully dependent on import. Why I'm mentioning this data? Because these are the critical area, and we are also giving main focus to this stream, e-waste management. And a major challenge we can see in our country, this 80%, more than 80% recycling is done by informal sector. We have huge population of informal sector, more than 20 lakh people are working in this area. That is also a major issue. Even this, we are also losing critical minerals because they don't have that level of technology. They are extracting only 20-30% of critical minerals or maybe precious metals, and rest we are throwing in the land and soil. So it also creating a pollution for our country. Oh, sorry. So this informal sector is also a major issue, and our manufacturer also facing a very big challenge because of not availability of secondary and critical raw material in our country. So in this direction, Government of India has taken various initiatives. We have started our journey in our ministry. We have started this e-waste management area in 2008 when we were not having our rule also. Our rule came in 2016. In MIT, we have started our first project on PCB recycling technology in 2008. So we started very right time, and this Niti Aayog also created different committees in different 11 sectors. So one of the committee was on the EEE sector, And there are some recommendation also given to different ministries that we have to come up with a short-term, medium-term, and long-term plan to create an ecosystem for creating supply chain of critical raw material in our country. So a lot of initiative has been taken by different departments. So MIT is the nodal ministry for this EEE sector. So we also taken various initiatives in our ministry. Like we have set up Center of Excellence in 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗶𝗏𝗂𝗏 Hyderabad. That is our autonomous body. This is a scientific autonomous body. We have created different recycling technology, like PCB recycling technology. We have demonstrated at 1 ton per day capacity. We are extracting different precious metal and critical minerals. And we also developed one technology on lithium and battery recycling technology. We have given these technology to more than 30 industries. 30, we can say that 30 plant is coming up in our country with this indigenous technology. We have also developed recycling technology for solar panel recycling. Solar panel, it is although not mandatory in our EPR, but maybe 2030 it will be mandatory. So we have already developed this technology, and we also transferred to one industry. They are also going to set up first plant in our country for solar panel recycling. And we are also working on this rare earth permanent magnet. You can see a lot of restriction has been made by different countries recently. Yeah, I'm not naming any country, but there's a lot of restriction on this rare earth permanent magnet. So we have also developed our process technology for recovering of critical minerals like neodymium and praseodymium. We are extracting from spent magnet, and we are also developing our process technology for making rare earth permanent magnet in our country. And apart from this technology and R&D innovation, we are also working on skilling and capacity building program. And Professor Bhaskar is also was our instrumental and our guidance he has given. We have set up 3 dismantling and skill segregation facility to provide skill and capacity building program to informal sector, even maybe any recyclers. We have set up 3 facilities, one in Assam, our eastern part of the country, and one we have set up in Punjab, in our we can say northern part of the country, and we have set up one facility in the 𝗗𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗏𝗏 Hyderabad. It is the southern part of the country. 3 facilities we have created. We are providing proper training to the informal sector so that they can be formalized, or we are also providing training to the students who are willing to come in this area. And we are also creating startups, entrepreneur in this area. And we also created AICT approved one MTech program in IIT Hyderabad. This is the first program. It is a MTech program, PG level program in our country. We have initiated it on e-waste management. And we also recently we have signed one MOU with IIT Ropar and IIT Roorkee. So we are also initiating 2 MTech program in these 2 IITs. These are the big, maybe IITs are the well known of the country. And recently, to address informal sector issues, we have initiated one project on informal sector upgradation. We are providing our technology, we are providing financial support to informal sector to formalize them. We are creating 30 e-waste recycling cluster across the country. This is a very big country. India is a big country. So we have selected 30 states, and in one state we are creating one pilot plant, common facility center. So informal sector people bring their material there, and they can process and they can take back, or maybe they can do business there. So it is a common facility center for them, so that they will not be losing their livelihood, and they will be in this business only. And because there is a main issue is that they will be losing livelihood if we are stopping this informal sector. So we think that the informal sector are our backbone. They are the good manager, or they have good channelization of these materials. So we are not stopping them, we are formalizing them with the environment friendly technology. So these are the some initiative we have taken. And you also know this National Critical Mineral Mission 2025 recently launched by the Government of India. This is a very big program of Government of India. And so this main objective of this NCMM National Critical Mineral Mission is also to create supply chain of our critical raw material, secondary raw material, to promote our electronic manufacturing in our country. So recently one scheme also has been launched on recycling link incentive by Ministry of Mines. It is around 1,500 crore incentive scheme. So we are promoting different recycling infrastructure in our country. And recently one announcement also made by Ministry of Heavy Industries to provide incentives on production of rare earth permanent magnet in our country. This is also more than 7,000 crore scheme. So these are the some initiative Government of India has taken. And we are also recently we have tie up with the UNDP team. We also finalized one project. This is a GEF Global Environmental Framework. one project under JF8. So it is around 120 million USD project. And we are also contributing more than maybe 400, 500 crore from our ministry. So this is a very big program we will be implementing in our country. So these are the some initiative we have taken. So we can see as a conclusion, I can say this, we have to understand the economic growth of our country. Both upstream and downstream are very important. So we have to see the upstream, like whatever I'm talking, it is a downstream of our products life cycle, like recycling and how to create infrastructure. Now we have to see upstream also. We have to design our product in such a manner that it can be reused, or it can be easily repairable, or it can be recycled at the end of life. So we have to see that upstream also. And refurbishment is also very important area, because circularity, this people are thinking that we have to recycle and we have to reuse the material, we have to reuse the material. But refurbishment is also one of the major pillar on this circular economy. So we also should give focus on refurbishment and repairability. So this right to repair framework is also identified on track in our country. So that is also coming soon, and that will be giving opportunity, or we can say this will be giving some mandatory or some forcefully. We are going to set up some repairing center in our country. So this is a big move. It will be a big move towards our circularity. So these are some initiative we have taken. So I think this is from my side. So I would like to congratulate, and I would like to best wishes to Karo Sambhav team. And I also request to continue this such type of program. And my request to Pranshu also, if we can arrange, or we can have some webinar on refurbishment. And recently I came to know this ITED is also one new area people are talking. So that also can be introduced in this some new next webinars. So thanks. This is from my side. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we have actually very well talked about various policy dimensions in this space. And what has happened, especially in the last 2 years, is that while we were looking at it more from an enforcement angle, which was e-waste tools based, we have moved from that to a very incentive driven solution where we are promoting use of recycled content. There are incentive schemes that government is rolling out for setup of high quality recycling plants. There is a very specific focus now on certain types of critical raw materials. ANRF, which has recently been said, is going to run a whole range of programs via 9 centers of excellence which have been set up. So we are starting to see a whole range of things. One of the biggest challenges from a material economy point of view have been who's going to be the buyer for these, who's going to do the offtake contracts. But the good news is that action on that side via Ministry of Heavy Industries, as you mentioned. So thank you for bringing in the various dimensions on the policy side on how do we initiate action in multiple formats. And yet, while again, it's all appreciated, what I think we are all looking forward to is how do we bring in mega traction, something which we call as population scale impact. How do we make it happen? And that has been a bit, how do I say, it has been very difficult to catch. We all have been running towards it, and how do we make sure that we really have the kind of impact that is truly desirable, but we still haven't reached that space. So thank you, Surendra, for coming here, for initiating this conversation. I will now like to bring in my colleague Shivangi to carry this conversation further. Shivangi? Yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Pranshu. Thank you. And thank you, Surendra, for your opening remarks, because they perfectly encapsulated how multifaceted our approach needs to be, and so many aspects we need to consider when we are moving towards this huge change and very necessary change. And it also reminded me of the reason of today's topic, because while we are talking about incentives and we're talking about how do we get these materials back and refurbishment, a very, very critical aspect that Surendra also touched upon is how do we incorporate the human angle into it, the cultural angle into it. And that is where our discussion today starts from. So I'll first and foremost introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Shri Mirza, who is an associate professor of sociology at BITS Law School with interests in urban anthropology, ecology, Waste, Anthropocene, Science, Technology and Society. A recipient of multiple international fellowships, she has over 12 years of teaching and research experience across leading Indian and global institutes. We have Dr. Anwesha Borthakur, who is an interdisciplinary researcher studying e-waste and textile waste governance in India, South Africa, and the EU. A former Marie Sklodowska-Curie postdoctoral fellow at KU Leuven, she holds a PhD from GNU and brings over 13 years of research experience on waste and circular economy policy. And Dr. Kalyan Bhaskar, who is an associate professor of strategic management at 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗂𝗶𝗶𝗏, researching sustainability, waste management, and circular economy. He advises organizations like BIS, UL, Niti Aayog, and NITI on policy and standards, and holds a PhD in public policy from IIM Ahmedabad with prior experience at BPCL. A warm welcome to all three of our panelists. So my first question actually is towards Dr. Shireen. From an anthropological perspective, how do you think or how do you study waste as a social and cultural object rather than just a material or technical object?
Thank you, Shivangi. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, and thank you for having me here. So from an anthropological perspective, because anthropology studies people and it studies waste from the perspective of people. And when I say people, I mean people like waste workers who work in the municipality and also waste pickers, informal waste pickers who go to the landfill on their own and pick waste. So anthropology gives us a very interesting perspective from the way these people see waste. And it's a perspective we can call from below. Right, and from an anthropological perspective, we have three key ideas, and I think both the earlier speakers kind of picked up on it. But it's very important to give our policies a certain flesh and blood and a certain perspective and a context. So, from an anthropological perspective, three very key ideas come into the fore when we talk about waste. They become very important. The first idea is that we look at any technology and any knowledge by asking ourselves, whose knowledge is it? And whose knowledge counts? So when we talk about e-waste and when we talk about toxicity and we talk about waste and discard, we ask, who is it toxic for? Who is it unwanted for? Right? So that's the first thing, that the perspective of below, or the people's perspective, or the waste pickers and a waste workers perspective, it actually helps us think about any knowledge as not being objective, but also being subjective and being very political and being very contextual. And that actually opens us, or it takes us to this other way of seeing waste, where we look at waste management not from a Western perspective, not from the perspective of first world countries, but from our own perspective, from the perspective of post-colonial countries, of third world countries, where we see the peculiarity of the composition of our waste, the peculiarity of our economy, the cultural and social aspects in which waste works, and we look for solutions that speak to our context. So it's, so anthropology brings in the subjective nature. It asks about the source of knowledge. How do we know what we know? And it also brings about the politics of representation. So it asks this very important question as toxic for whom? Right? And that really brings us to the very important point, actually, which I think is already on the table, that from an anthropological perspective, and anthropology does it takes a people's perspective and it sort of scales up, it zooms out, and it kind of makes it a more macro perspective through which we can rethink law and policy and so on. And from an anthropological perspective, we see that repurposing or reusing is far more important, or should be given far more emphasis than recycling, right? And I can already see that the government is thinking in those lines, and it also corroborates with other scientists, particularly engineers, energy engineering, where they look at recycling as being very high in energy consuming. They look at recycling as producing a lot of toxic chemicals. And we also look at recycling as profiting companies and industries, but not necessarily profiting our own local economy, right? And anthropology really confirms that perspective, that refurbishing, repurposing, and which already exists in Indian cities, so Nehru Place and in Delhi and other, areas within India, where you have these these informal economies where something is fixed as opposed to recycled and reproduced again, right? And so that actually complicates the idea of circular economy. And I'm very, interested in the kind of in the name of our session. It's decoding circularity. It's in some sense also problematizing circularity. It's saying that this whole take back is maybe not as necessary for our own economy, for our own context, as what we already have, which is repurposing, fixing, reusing already what we have, as opposed to recycling. So it's kind of from an anthropological perspective, you kind of actually see the two as not going hand in hand, but see the two as kind of, where one should be preferred. So repurposing should be preferred over recycling, right? So I can come back and I can talk more about it. But yeah, maybe we'll let others come in and I'll step in. Yeah. Hi, Shivangi. Should I continue or?
We seem to just have lost connection. Just give us a second. Yeah, I'm back. I'm sorry. Dr. Shireen, I lost you there for a moment towards the end. You'll have to mute yourself. Yes, thanks. But a very fascinating point, actually, because the view from below is something that we don't usually think of. I think in a lot of conversations around waste management, often informal sector ends up being relegated to a problem statement needs to be solved, and less as a resource of an existing very, very deep and like at least in its own right flourishing ecosystem that could be harnessed. Absolutely. And I do think, Dr. Shireen, also from a future perspective, I think there is space enough in India for both recycling and refurbishment or repurposement to exist or coexist for the next few years at the very least, because we have enough waste that has gotten generated and is currently unaddressed versus the waste that we are generating daily. So the approach kind of would be good to have a multi-purpose approach or a multi-pronged approach of, yes, we need to deal with whatever cannot be repurposed anymore and cannot be refurbished anymore, while also focusing on how can we elongate the life of things. Not able to hear me?
Yes, we're able to hear you.
I just want to check if I'm audible to everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, we are facing some internet challenges in the office. I have another question though. From your research perspective, I want to know a little bit more about what you've seen with regards to the politics of waste in India and the key themes that you have examined, for example, in your paper as well.
What is very interesting when you go and you speak to people who work in the waste pickers, and I also work with municipal waste workers in Mumbai. It is that, unlike what NGOs and the way in which, even policymakers talk about waste as being unwanted, as discard, or as toxic, people who work with waste, who actually touch waste, think of it in terms of access. So there's a huge, they go through a lot to even access waste, right? So it's also about livelihood. It's about the difficulties in accessing it. They don't think of it, even though a lot of them get TB, etc. They don't think of it as toxic, very strangely enough. And they think of it as resource, right? And I think there's something a lot there that, one has to unpack. The view from below also tells us that, so much of waste work is very much tied to caste labor. Right. So, and then this is something, all of us who do anthropology and work with people, we understand that waste, is not necessarily about the object itself, right? It's about the meanings and the kind of symbolism, right, that is attached to waste. So waste in India becomes not just discard and unwanted, it becomes stigmatized. So, then you have this whole social hierarchy drawing from religion and culture, etc., which, looks at people who touch waste as, as people who maybe are subhuman, inhuman in that sense, and there's a sense in which we don't value the work and the contribution that these people have constantly put into our cities, where they kind of go and they pick waste and they sell this waste, and 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 work talks about it. So in that sense, one of the things that comes across from my work is that waste labor continues to be very much ridden in caste. You can actually see the division between people who pick waste, so waste pickers who are not municipal workers. They, in the case of Bombay, seem to come from the Matang Samaj. I mean, it's so kind of caught up in caste. And those who work in the municipalities, say, are 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗃 rights and they are from particular caste. So it's actually that much fixed into caste, and my book explores that. The other thing we see is that Indian cities continue to be highly unequal and are becoming more and more unequal, right? When you're looking at access to water, access to electricity, access to waste, access to sanitation, we see that that those inequalities being really mapped out into the way our cities work and our sanitation works. And if we can kind of, maybe question that hierarchy, decode the understanding of waste, and take it away from stigma, we can actually give value to what you're saying, but actually even Surendra ji even spoke about, which is that giving value to people who work with waste, our informal waste takers, our informal economy, those who repurpose, who actually go collect the waste, segregate it, sell it. These can be our strengths. They don't need to be something that, some of the trade bans actually that we have in place, in the fact that we are signatories to the Basel Convention and so on, which actually looks at dumping of toxic material, as something that is illicit, and it criminalizes a lot of our informal economy. And I think, I mean, I'm happy that the Niti Aayog is working in that direction, but if that can become, a policy where we kind of see our informal, we value it, the informal economy, we value the contribution, we take it away from stigma, and we change the kind of the notions that waste seems to carry in India to make it more just, to make it more equitable, and to see waste from the perspective of those who use it, which is waste as resource, as valuable, as not as toxic and discard.
Yeah, because I think from a consumer perspective, our journey with any product ends when we are done with it, and for a majority of people, that is where their interaction with any product ends. But for a lot of waste, because as you said, it's a resource, and I think I have also seen the shift in the past few years as India's policies have also changed. They've started looking at waste less as a nuisance to be gotten rid of and more as a resource. And of course, the more we work on it, we'll also start hopefully introducing these aspects of how better can we incorporate the human aspect into waste management, because maybe at some point we need to have different strategies for different cities or different strategies for different type of cities, right? On consumer behavior though, Dr. Anwesha, my next question is actually to you. Dr. Shireen, you I think were trying to say something. You wanted to add something?
I'm just going to agree with you. And just one last, that, when we think of waste technologies, maybe we can, like you said, different technologies and waste management for different cities. So we don't have one size fits all. We don't borrow from the West. We actually design our technologies in our local conditions, and we kind of move it from capital intensive to labor intensive. We actually work with what is strong in our economy, right? So that's, I think, just as a conclusion, and absolute agreement with what you're saying. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Shireen. Dr. Anwesha, on the aspect of public perception and consumer behavior, right? Based on your research and understanding of consumer behavior, do you see consumers engaging with the nuance between waste as a nuisance versus waste as a resource? And do you think it's necessary or important for them to even understand that nuance?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And that's a very good question. I absolutely agree that, consumers should be aware, and consumer awareness is the key for successful implementation of any policy, including the e-waste rules. However, I did some research in the city of Bengaluru and in New Delhi, and in both, I could see that people are actually not aware of e-waste. They use electronic products. Of course, you have huge discount on electronic products during festive season, for instance, during Diwali or any other festive season. And they do not see it as a kind of wrongdoing or wrong thing to purchase new electronic equipments every now and then. You can see it in India with the introduction of iPhones, for instance. The kind of, the kind of queue that you see in those stores during the new launch is something you don't see usually. So consumer awareness is the key, but then we must also remember that we are an aspiring society. We have one of the large youth population in the world. Many of the people who are using electronic products were actually born after the IT revolution started or our economy opened up. So these guys, they grew up with like using electronic products from their childhood, from a very young age. So that has been an instrumental part of their life. And it is growing up. It is not going down anywhere soon. Also, we must remember, for instance, there are the instance of COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, which actually forced us to use electronic products like never before. So I am from Assam. My husband is from Jammu and Kashmir. And during the COVID time, I happened to be in those relatively remote places in India. And I could see how parents were kind of forced to buy new electronic products so that their children could take the online classes. So if there were like one smartphone in the household, the villagers were forced to buy new electronic products, a new smartphone to carry on with their educational or business or other activities. So I see that it will grow up, but at the same time, the awareness is the key. People whom I interviewed, urban masses, like who you can call, like they are aware of the world affairs, they know what's going on in the world, but they didn't have any idea that there exists a e-waste rule in the country. So they didn't have any idea. They didn't see it wrong that they were purchasing new products every few months, I would say. And for them, many of them were like first-time university goers or first-time city comers, or, like first generation city comers, I would say. And for them, buying a new phone every now and then is a part of their success story. So if they could afford it, they will buy it. So they don't see it wrong, So we are in a very tricky situation, I would say, in the global south, and especially in emerging economies like India, where we have to address the environmental concerns because we are a large country with a huge population. So even if our per capita e-waste generation is still lower than many high-income countries, in absolute terms, it's massive. So we have to deal with that, but at the same time, we have to also take into account that we are an aspiring society. We are a digital society, highly digital, at least more digital than the European countries I have lived till now. So, and there is a push for digitalization, which says that, you need to have good smartphones or good IT equipments at the least. And these are like the small equipments actually are the major generators of e-waste. Like more than 50% are generated by small equipments, which we don't really care about. Those lie somewhere in our drawers or somewhere in our household. And those are actually major generators of e-waste. Yeah, we have, I think, a long way to go. We need more discussions like this, as Professor Shireen already mentioned, like also the role of the informal sector, toxicity for whom we are producing the waste, but then it is a resource for some other people. Yeah, long way to go, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely, Dr. Anwesha. And I think in some ways, maybe it might be a losing battle to change or in any way affect consumer behavior when it comes to the purchasing patterns, but working on changing the perception of how the waste gets managed, or even if it's not waste, the old product, let's say, let's not call it waste, because it's reached its end of life with that particular consumer, but it might not have reached its end of life completely. So how that perception slowly changes, and we have seen how easy it can become, because we absolutely have people in our country or organizations in our country who have done excellent work when it comes to, for example, making it very easy for people to exchange their old products, right? And then give them refurbished products. And it's so, people are so used to it now, and we are so used to it now that there was a time we would buy a new phone and our old phone was in our drawer, but now we expect some money in return for our old phone. So the easier we make it for people, I think the easier it is also to bring them over a little bit here. So while we can't, we may not be able to purely affect the purchasing patterns of consumers, but we can absolutely, I think, affect how they deal with their products once it has become theirs. My next question is actually to Dr. Bhaskar, because I'm just wondering from as Dr. Anwesha mentioned, like a lot of us, a lot of population of India currently is youth, right? People who were born after the IT revolution, a lot of people who have grown up with electronics, and these are also the people who have been going through our colleges and our institutes and universities. And this is where, for example, we are also seeing new entrepreneurs emerge, right? Who are working in the space of sustainability, in the space of circular economy. So as someone who's teaching sustainability and entrepreneurship, have you ever seen these social or cultural considerations being an aspect that affects a budding entrepreneur's decisions?
Thank you, Shivangi, for that question. And thank you, Pranshu, Kirti, for organizing this thing. Now, I've been teaching sustainability in different management institutes for last 11 years. And I've been tracking e-waste ever since the first laws were drafted in India in 2011, since last 15 years. And I've had a lot of interaction with policymakers, the informal sector, and the businesses, and teaching about students. One clear distinction that I see, or one clear change that I see, when e-waste was first seen as an issue in India, issues were more from a social externality or environmental problem or environmental pollution. And therefore, we were talking about what happens to the people who engage with that, the toxicity of that, the impact on the environment. I think that was the narrative. So initially, when students were told about this, when I started teaching about 2015, the level of awareness in general was low then. And then focus was more on creating awareness, getting to people to know about more of this. The concept of circularity was not as embedded as it is today, or was not as known as it is today. What I clearly see the distinction today, that e-waste beyond informal sector, even for the companies and for the government, is now seen as a resource. Because of what has happened post-COVID and the issue of critical minerals suddenly gaining light, all this thing that we are seeing even Donald Trump doing on Greenland, it's less to do with national security, it's more to do with critical minerals. So I think that critical minerals has again forced governments in India to look at e-waste as a resource. Earlier it was the informal sector for whom it was a mal. So they never used to refer. So when I used to go and visit people in Delhi, Silampur, Mustafabad, they didn't used to say waste में हम treat कर रहे हैं, चलो waste खरीदते हैं, waste बेचते हैं. For them it was a resource. Now that resource can be from a wire, that copper wire, from charging wire, or from different materials. And the knowledge system that resides with them, I think, goes back 400, 500 years. So very glad to have Dr. Mirza here, because she would have tracked this knowledge systems which have been passed over generations about different materials. For them, e-waste is essentially the constellation of materials. It's not one material per se. There are a lot of materials, toxic, non-toxic, ferrous, non-ferrous, and those knowledge systems resided with them, and they used to do that. Now, because of the rules, they have lacked legal legitimacy, but they have always had market legitimacy, and therefore they continue to thrive. Even after 15 years of rules, market actors continue to engage with them directly, overtly, covertly, and all of that. So when I looked earlier, students were more talking about creating awareness, gaining awareness. But today I know I am mentoring a couple of startups of students, or who want to get into this more from a criticality lens, from a circularity lens, where their interest in e-waste, whether it is solar panel or electronic product or even those new batteries, batteries powering our electric vehicles or batteries, now battery energy storage services. So they are looking at as an economic issue and less of an environmental issue. So environmental has perhaps gotten into a backside. Economic issue has come up, and therefore now we suddenly Ministry of Mines was completely silent till about 2020. They were nowhere on picture, but today now they seem to be no. E-waste is a resource for us, and we need to tap in that resource. And again, I think the more we go about refurbishing, now refurbishing is essentially extending the useful life of a product. And when we talk about extended producer responsibility, EPR is just not about recycling. So even when you extend the useful life of a product, I think that's meeting the purpose. But the more it is seen as a resource, I think the more focus will come from industry and from government to extract that material again. And we might change a shift in the narrative of how you look at e-waste. And I think the startups, because I teach MBA students, so for them, I think it's more of an economic opportunity that they are after. That, okay, now it's an economic opportunity, how we can tap in, how we can scale it up, how we can grow it big. I think that's the metrics for which they get money from the investors, because investors are not content on doing something for a region.
I do wonder, Dr. Bhaskar, if that also is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you're absolutely creating an incentive which market goes where the money goes or where the resource goes. So if you create enough incentives, if you make it lucrative enough, people will go there. But you don't want to lose the human or the social aspect which initially prompted action on e-waste, because that was one of the core reasons we wanted to work on this. So do you think that is still something that gets addressed at a university level or in the classes that these students attend?
So again, so let's say Shireen and I come from two different types of institutes. So Shireen will be getting a different type of student, I will be taking a different type of institute. When you consider academic institute, I think academic institutes are not one monolith. E-waste can be taught in a law school, it can be taught in a management school, it can be taught in a technical institute. IITs can be teaching it. But what aspects of e-waste we will be dealing with will be very different. So for example, Dr. Mirza might be talking more about how waste, who deals with waste, what exactly is waste, who are these people, the knowledge system that decides with them perhaps. Her focus might be there. Someone who might be dealing with, let's say, NIT Jamshedpur. In Jamshedpur, we have NML, National Metallurgical Laboratory, and it is one of the pioneer institutes in India on recycling. Their focus will only be on, okay, through pyrometallurgy or hydrometallurgy, which material can be recycled, through what is extraction rate and everything. So for them, e-waste, they approach from a different angle. Now, when I do that in a management institute, also teaching public policy, now I have to look into the policy regulatory aspect, the informal sector, the business aspect. So again, we might be approaching e-waste from very different perspectives in the same academia, but from a very different perspective.
I think, but that also highlights the purpose of policy here, because it for someone who is, for example, just looking at the technical aspects of them, say for example pyrometallurgy and hydrometallurgy, the moment you go and start procuring your waste, if you are not looking at the social aspects at all, that is another place where things could fall through the cracks. So I'm just saying that is absolutely an aspect.
They might, but understand. So if let's say if I were to raise the money from an investor today, now it again depends on if I am raising money from a philanthropic focused investor, or am I raising money from a, let's say, who is more looking at a scalability front. The more I go into scalability front, the more I will focus on technologies and machines, and the more I will dehumanize that process. So then I'll ignore, okay, which people get impacted or how machines. Now, in all economics, we are told machines replace humans. So the more we'll focus on that, we'll ignore, okay, informal sector, 90%, 10 million people, that might not matter to the investor. Because initially, for them, e-waste is a resource. Now, if that resource is used ineffectively or inefficiently by people, and people get replaced by machines, essentially that's all what's happened in industrial revolution, even in ST 4.0, AI will essentially now take away more jobs. So I don't think investors will, unless you are getting social impact investors, then who might look also into, okay, what is the impact created on communities? They might be perhaps using that as a KPI. Otherwise, traditional investors.
But even there, Dr. Bhaskar, we have seen that the money part of it absolutely makes a huge consideration whenever we are talking about investors, and when they are seeing the feasibility of any particular enterprise or budding enterprise, when they're looking at whether or not to invest. Absolutely, the moment you start talking scale up, you rightfully pointed out that there's a certain level of dehumanization that is almost inherent. in the way the current investment systems work. Is there any particular work on ways that you've found incredibly compelling, and you think that currently has the most potential to move things forward?
I think from the Indian context, what I can talk about the work that perhaps we are dealing with, and we had a talk with editor-in-chief of a FT 50 journal, Financial Times 50 journal last year. We were talking about informal work. Essentially, a lot of what we know in literature today, management literature today, essentially I can talk about management literature, it's been developed essentially in the Western markets based on theories and markets that perhaps originated from there. Now, EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, rose from Sweden, and it was perhaps designed where formal institutions and markets operate. Now, when we look at evidence of wherever EPR has been implemented, whether it's in non-Western context, whether it is Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, or India, there are challenges because these markets are fundamentally different from the markets from where EPR was perhaps conceptualized. And a lot of work here gets done. So right now, our focus is on informal work. And the editor-in-chief then said, I come from Italy and I can relate to you. And then there is a scant of understanding about how work is carried out in the informal sector. So there is a different way of organizing work. So e-waste then becomes let's say, a subsystem, and we are looking at perhaps how work gets organized in the informal sector and how typically that work is in a way very different, but also somewhat similar to how traditional companies work. And unless there is an understanding, EPR implementation will continue to have challenges, will continue to have limitations in non-Western contexts.
That's a fascinating aspect. I would love to read that because again, we keep mentioning that a lot of whether it's technology, whether it's policy, a lot of what currently India is implementing is in one way or the other borrowed from Western context, and the context there is completely different, right? The same technology might not work in India because the economics are completely different. Where in Western country, we are not buying waste. Here we are buying waste, and that throws off the entire economy of the whole system. But absolutely fascinating because management is an aspect, again, that is very, very important, but not thought of often. Dr. Anwesha, my last question to you, actually, my next question and my last question to you actually is, based on your research on consumer behavior, is there any particular piece of insight or understanding that you think is very, very essential to have a conversation about e-waste that can match what's actually happening on ground?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually agree with both Dr. Kalyan and Shireen because it's also the Western perspective, like EPR is a Western concept. We actually ignore the fact that there is a kind of a circular economy that already exists in our society. Like the 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗶𝗂𝗶, what they are doing, basically they are extending the lives of our waste, or they are contributing to a kind of a circular economy. Regarding the consumer, what my finding was that there is a big what you call challenge on the concept of like privacy of your mobile phones or your IT equipments, because people are not willing to throw away their smartphone even if they don't use it, because nobody actually ensures that their private, or they do not have the trust that like their privacy will be dealt with adequately. Because in our smartphones nowadays, you have everything. You have your bank details, you have your, like emails, social media, everything is in your smartphone, for instance, or in your computers. So they are not really willing to get rid of that. Another thing, what I observed was I would say the convenience of recycling. So people would not travel 10 kilometers to dispose of one smartphone in a city like Delhi or Bengaluru, for instance, where the traffic is a big thing. So in Europe, what works is that you have these stations in the supermarkets, for instance, to dispose of your electronics. We have one. I am in the Technical University of Munich now. Previously, I was in LMU. So we have these e-waste bins where, like you are sure that your privacy will be dealt with. You are sure that, like your electronics will find a new purpose, or at least will be dismantled according to the law of the land. And that's why people are more confident in disposing of their electronic products. And especially in Delhi, I would say if you go to a place like Nehru Place in Delhi, you will see that they can literally repair everything. So, like when I want to dispose of my smartphone in India, for instance, I'm always like, it should not go to narrow place, because they will be able to do everything, like repair even a dead electronic product. So I think from the consumer point of view, we have to ensure their privacy. We have to ensure the convenience of recycling, so that you have e-waste dumping bins with complying with the law completely every few kilometers. I think that's something we should be taking care of if we want our policies to work.
I completely agree. The convenience of recycling and the visibility or trust in the system that's handling that recycling. And I think convenience is partly or maybe entirely why informal sector thrives so much, because they have that level of access to people, and it's just genuinely very, very convenient for a lot of materials to dispose of that way. But yes, I think this is one maybe slightly Western concept that works pretty well here as well, of how can we enable participation of people, consumers, more and more, and how can we make it easier for them to trust that whatever they are giving is going for the same application that they think it is going for, whether it is refurbishing or whether it is recycling. Thank you so much, Dr. Anwesha. My last question to Dr. Shireen now is, if you were to redesign e-waste policy with maybe justice as a starting point, what would be 3 changes that you would make?
Yeah. So I just want to add to some of the conversations that have been happening, and particularly to what Kalyan said. Where in the same in academia, you have different kinds of conversations on waste. One is social, one is engineering, technical, and the other is management. And I think particularly when a panel like this happens, I think this is a call for us to actually speak to each other, right? So I think when engineers are developing and thinking about waste, if they can bring in the social aspect, right? Or even when management is thinking of startups and innovations, if you can actually, I think there's is something useful in drawing from the anthropological insights, which where something questions of justice don't just become about social issues. They can also be monetized if we have the imagination for it, right? I mean, I think once that conversation happens, one doesn't know where that could lead to. I think some of the problem is that so much of the way we think about it happens in silos and in separate spaces, and we kind of and a forum like this is so precious, because it brings in policymakers, it brings in companies, it brings in academics from different perspectives, it brings in NGOs, and it's so important to speak across, because that's the only way to actually rethink and do things differently from how we have been doing it. And I think that's one thing we can agree on, right? Like, we need to do things differently. Things are changing, but they can change for the better. And we can think of, social ways in which even engineering we can work together and see where that conversation leads. So that's just one thing I wanted to say. If we can bring in justice, and if we say we can have this kind of multiple kind of conversation with different stakeholders, one is that, some of the EPR systems that we've been talking about, and I think Kalyan also talked about it, which is that EPR in the Indian context has different kinds of problems, where, the existing system, so where, say where a company like Apple has to take back the products that it is introducing, right? The entire system actually inhibits reuse. So I think if we put justice in the center, we will have to talk about how the system can enable reuse, how we can actually prioritize the informal reuse economy over remanufacturing. Right. So I think that's one way in which, if you bring in the anthropological perspective, if you bring in justice, and if we kind of, contextualize something like EPR in our own context, we can actually, complicate how the system stops reuse, right? How it criminalizes something like reuse and actually incentivizes recycling. So that's one, I think, that I could think of. The second one was in the area of trade bans, right? Where you have signatories and notifications between countries that actually, talk about hazardous substances and hazardous labor and so on. Because what trade bans do is that they actually push the informal economy into the shadows, into a certain criminal aspect. And I think, there's a way in which that doesn't suit our local conditions. Right. So I think if it acts as a deterrent for the informal economy. And I think, one could say really quite clearly that the informal economy brings in questions of justice and sustainability, of environment and economics together, right? So I think questioning trade bans then becomes a second point. And the third point is when it comes to designing, and I was talking about that conversation between social scientists and engineers and management people, where there can be better designing, which is more sustainable, right? So where, the kind of material selection and the assemblage structure that we have, maybe there's a better, we can design where we work with less hazardous material, and maybe the removal of copyright, maybe the removal of trademarks, so that reuse is incentivized. Reuse is made possible. And it's not just, Apple that decides how it produces, how it should be reused, and how it can, recycle. You actually democratize the whole thing. If you bring in that conversation I'm talking about between anthropologists and between NGOs and between engineers and management, I think there are certain newer business ideas that can be made possible. That's my utopic thinking. Yeah, but yeah, I'd like to read that.
Absolutely, Dr. Mirza. And I think it's always a tussle between, if I really need to, at the expense of maybe starting a much longer conversation about capitalism and socialism, it is. I think there's always a tussle between, okay, how can we economically scale things up and make them profitable and run, versus how can we minimize the human cost of it all. And I think the scale up of human touch is something that that we still need to figure out, because humans have figured out how to scale up machines. We have not figured out how to scale up the human touch, the human aspect of things. So I think, irrespective of whether the utopia is achieved or not, I think the conversation itself is very important, because some of these things might be things that are not even being thought of right now. So thank you so much, Dr. Shireen, and as well to Dr. Anwesha and Dr. Bhaskar for your inputs. Any of such conversations are always the start, never the end. But the hope is that a little spark in someone's mind might lead them down a line where they can explore more and more of where does this thought process lead? Where does this particular line of questioning, of curiosity leads? So thank you all three for being here with us today. And if Surendra ji is also on the call, thank you for him as well, to come and tell us about what media and government in general is doing, because it's also heartening to see how much we have pivoted the conversation around waste from a nuisance to a resource, and also exciting to see it evolve even more. So with that, I think we'll close our webinar. We would like to thank the audience for listening in. I hope that at least some of you got some ideas to explore more and start conversations of your own. I would like to thank the sponsors which enabled this conversation to happen: Apple, Dell Technologies, Canon India, Cisco, Ericsson, Tejas Networks, Boat, Nothing, and Sienna for their continued support. We have another webinar next month, which is the finale of this year's webinar series, and we look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you and have a good day.